Let's just go back to the
hiring more
document for a
people.
second before we talk about the money. Where in the document does it say the NHS is not for sale? Because the suggestions throughout, the document suggests the US wants total market access. That was one of the suggestions in the document. Documents suggest the US wants to talk about patents. And people will be aware that prescriptions are more expensive, drugs are more expensive in the US. Those are in the document.
In terms of market access, that is not to do with the NHS. And in fact, Jeremy Corbyn in the TV debate last week held up this document, redacted, and it says market access for our NHS. That was not true. And it shows how desperate Labour are, frankly, to change the subject from the tax rises they want to put on
people. But the Americans want to start. What's clear from the document is that the Americans want to start all their trade talks with that principle that you can talk about everything.
And we are clear that there's an exemption to that, which is the NHS, and the Americans accept that. And there are, in the 451 pages, the NHS is mentioned 4 times. And that shows that it isn't for sale.
Well,
and we're clear in our manifesto also in terms of what we will do and the approach we'll take, that the NHS will not be on the table. And you mentioned the patents. The price that we pay for medicines won't be on the table. I mean, why
were they having these discussions in the first place? Why, over this huge period of time, a great lengthy discussions? Why were they talking about, and why was the NHS mentioned at all? A lot of people will be confused that you're saying none of this is up for discussion, but they were talking about it. Talks did take place over a long period of time at great length.
Of course, we're having preliminary discussions with the Americans about trade. The accusation that was made by Jeremy Corbyn was that these documents somehow show that the NHS will be part of these discussions. In fact, it was mentioned in the discussions because people about the response to the consultation, because it is not being on the table, and that people are concerned that it shouldn't be on the table. And I agree with that. For instance, if you read out in the first mention of the NHS, it says this is not an area where we are expecting US offensive us. We're not expecting the Americans to ask, and they know that. And the reason is because we are absolutely clear that the NHS will not be on the table. So
there comes a point. There comes a point with some of these discussions.
The document, when you read it, debunks the claim that Labour have been making for some time that the NHS is for sale. And I, as Health Secretary, and the Prime Minister also, have been absolutely crystal clear that it won't be on the table.
So there comes a point with all of these discussions where, in a way, what you're saying is we have to trust you. We have to trust the Prime Minister, and we have to trust you, Matt Hancock. So on that theme, people refer back to things they've already seen that you've promised. Yeah. I want you to clarify for me nurse recruitment. You have said, that Boris Johnson has said, there will be 50,000 more nurses.
There will,
Now, people will be aware by now those numbers have been unpicked, and 18,500 of those are existing nurses. So can you explain why that becomes 50,000 more?
More. I'll be absolutely crystal clear, yes. There are currently, according to the latest figures out last week, 280,599 registered nurses working in the NHS. And our commitment is to increase that number by 50,000 to 330,000, just over 330,000 nurses in the NHS. That is our commitment. Over the last year, we've seen 5,000 more nurses in the NHS, so we've seen an increase, which is great. Part of the increase will come from new training places, more apprenticeships. I love nursing apprenticeships because then people can earn and learn at the same time. Some will come from international recruitment, and there's actually figures out this morning showing that international recruitment is rising as well. And some will come from measures to ensure that people who are already registered nurses either stay in the NHS or come back to the NHS.
So that's the 18,000. I'm sorry, people are going to be absolutely baffled by your maths.
No, they're not. No,
let me just, please, let me just set this out as it appears. It appears you're saying that you're going to have 50,000 more nurses.
More nurses,
but 18,500 are already nurses. Is that the case?
We're going to increase the number of nurses in the NHS by 50,000.
No, really, can you try and answer that one question?
Yeah, I was
your
before you interrupted.
50,000
Just
figure,
let me explain.
There are 18,500 who are already now nurses. How can they be 50,000 more? How can that number be part of the more?
Because if you want to increase a workforce, you do it by training, by recruitment.
They're already in the system. They're 18,500 already in the system.
I'm so sorry. You've really got to let me answer the question because it is crystal clear and I've answered it several times already. And if you just let me answer, we are going to increase training. We're going to have